Hello, and welcome to SCG Global Spin. Your host today is Kelley Duke. Kelley is a shareholder and director at Ireland Stapleton, where she is head of the firm's litigation practice group. In addition, she is also the incoming chair for SCG Legal in 2021. We also have Sara Barrett. Sara is a partner at Mills & Reeve, where she provides commercial and pragmatic employment law, and is based out of their Manchester office in the UK. Finally, we have Felicity Fowler. Felicity is a partner at McGinnis Lochridge and is the chair of their labor and employment group. She is based out of their Dallas, Texas office.
I want to start off by talking about some new legislation that Colorado has recently enacted called the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. That legislation comes into effect as of January 2021 of this year. And it provides for a lot of different things. It provides that employees have the right to discuss with their other employees what their pay or compensation is without any fear of retaliation or any fear of getting in trouble with their employers. It has a prohibition, which I think is really significant, certainly for employers, that they can never ask potential employees in interviews about their previous wage history. And so there's been a lot of discussion in Colorado about that. It also provides for 3 years of back pay and double damages if it's proved that there's been a violation of the Equal Pay, Equal Work Act. And so this has been pretty controversial legislation here in Colorado. I'm curious, Felicity, whether Texas has something similar, or if you've seen any push on the federal level to have legislation like this come forward.
Well, thank you, Kelley, and I am also thrilled to be here. I will say that's very exciting about Colorado, and it is something that we are seeing other states across the nation also enacting when it comes to equal pay, Paycheck Fairness Act, questions regarding somebody's salary history. In Texas right now, we do not have anything similar. And I'm not sure if we are going to get anything similar in the next year or two. But I can say on the federal level, there has been talk of a Paycheck Fairness Act, which is very similar to what you described in Colorado, that will take effect in January. And so we're just going to have to see, now that we do know after the Georgia Senate elections that the Senate is going to be Democrat, or at least a 50-50 split, with Vice President Harris having the deciding vote on the Democrat side, that we may be seeing some of these types of laws that have been talked about for several years actually being put into legal legislation. So just something to watch out for. But it is something that, because over the last several years we have not seen been enacted on the federal level, we are seeing states like Colorado and others enacting these similar types of legislation on the local level. I will say, though, that already on the federal level, we do have one law, the Equal Pay Act, that does cover broadly a lot of the issues that you talked about, especially when it comes to equal pay for equal work. Now, there's been some controversy as to whether or not that the Equal Pay Act has enough teeth to actually be scary, or something that employers take into consideration, which is why we're seeing a lot of these legislations popping up across the country. So that is it in a nutshell.
Great. Sara, what about you? What are you seeing in the UK?
Yeah, so we've had equal pay legislation for some time, essentially same concept, equal pay for equal work for men and women. Our equal pay legislation is enshrined in the Equality Act, which also provides protection for other areas of discrimination. And the equal pay legislation over here covers all aspects of compensation, so not just salary, but also looking at benefits, etc. as well. And by law, basically, employers can't put in place terms and conditions that put individuals at a disadvantage because of what we would call a protected characteristic. And we have several protected characteristics, which include sex, disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, that type of area. So that all goes towards pay protection as well as extending protection beyond that. In terms of looking back at individuals' pay, I'm not sure we've got anything equivalent to that. We've recently, I think just in the last couple of years, employers have started to report on the gender pay gap. That's a big issue over here, and essentially showing stats that report on the difference between the average earnings of men and women, and looking at essentially trying to bring down the differences there. It's interesting that the legislation and the reporting has shown that women tend to be behind on the on pay even before they've had a first child. So there's quite a lot of work going into getting employers. It's this, only employers of a size of 250 or more have to report, but they have to publish that information, and so it's making that type of information publicly available, which is allowing employees, unions, the press, all to see their figures, and that's all bring pressure to try and shorten that gap.
Well, that's interesting. And it brings up another point I was planning to talk to you all about, which is the fact that studies have shown that this pandemic in 2020 has really adversely and disproportionately affected women. Have you all had any experience, either, anecdotally or with any of your clients, about those adverse effects? And I guess a follow-up question to that would be, do you foresee any type of either law or litigation coming related to the disproportionate impact that this pandemic has had on women?
Okay, I mean, we've obviously had, as many countries had, closure of schools, and the requirement for parents to undertake homeworking over here. That appears to still largely have fallen more heavily on the female staff's shoulders. Often, I think, because choices have been made within the family, so that the woman of the family might have decided to already work part-time and possibly take that slight step back in her career, and therefore when we've gone into these times, there's definitely been some conversations around, well, if the children are in the house, who's going to step up to that? I mean, equally, we've seen some really good examples of parents sharing that, but a lot of requests having to be dealt with by employers in terms of allowing staff to take additional leave, people needing to shorten hours, and I think that's put a huge strain on all parents, but you get the impression from the questions we're being asked by clients that the brunt is perhaps still being taken by women in that regard.
Yes, I agree, Sarah. We're seeing the same type of phenomenon here, absolutely. And there's been lots of reports about the disparate impact of the pandemic on women, especially in the working world. Unfortunately, studies have shown that not only are women bearing more of the at-home responsibilities, the childcare, the homework, those types of issues, but as well as, unfortunately, they are the first ones to be furloughed or laid off, and then the last ones to be called back to an employer site when jobs start opening up and people start returning to the workplace. Those are just some of the studies I've seen. I will say here in the United States, we had passed in 2020 the FFCRA, which was the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act, that did provide paid leave for employees who worked for an eligible employer, had to be a certain size employer, and those employees were entitled to a certain proportion of their pay if they had children at home, and because the schools were closed and they needed to also stay home to be with those children. Unfortunately, the FFCRA expired on December 31st of 2020. So there's been a period beginning January 1st of this year where we don't have that federal legislation in play. However, there are talks right now as to potentially bringing back the FFCRA. President Biden has called for that to come back in this year. He's also called for it to be expanded. Under the old FFCRA, it provided for up to 12 weeks of leave. He's called for 14 weeks. He's also called for additional coverage, not only for somebody who themselves is suffering from COVID, or their children are at home and somebody needs to stay with the children because the school is closed, but he's also called for coverage for employees that need to go get vaccinated and all the associated logistical concerns with getting vaccinated, waiting in line, filling out paperwork and things like that. So interesting, we'll just have to see whether we get this new FFCRA under the new administration that will be passed. And again, it's just kind of a wait and see right now.
Sara, does the UK have anything similar to the FFCA that we have here in the United States?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So we've had the coronavirus retention scheme, which everybody just calls the furlough scheme, which essentially allows employers to, with employee consent, place employees on 80% pay and to remain at home. They're not allowed to then undertake any work for the employer if they are on furlough. But what's quite interesting is that we've seen and had many clients report that they've had employees saying, we want to be put on furlough. And it's obviously not a right for the individual to be put on furlough. It was originally really introduced with a view to help struggling businesses, allow them to put their staff on leave, be able to access government funds, and hopefully avoid having to make people permanently redundant. But what we saw was a bit of an upsurge of some employees wanting to access that because of the issues they were having at home, whether it was because of wanting to homeschool or looking after elderly parents, or if they were vulnerable themselves and were shielding. This idea that you could be at home and take, albeit something of a pay reduction, was obviously quite attractive, and it's created an interesting dynamic in that obviously some businesses, particularly key businesses, ones that everybody needed to really keep going during the pandemic, who were really busy, for instance pharmaceutical companies, hadn't really necessarily wanted or planned to put people on furlough, but the furlough scheme was seen by the individuals as something that allowed them to help perhaps balance some of the additional home responsibilities that they had. Now our scheme's been extended 2 or 3 times now. It's currently due to come to the end in April, hopefully to coincide with the UK's vaccination programme getting through our most vulnerable people in society, and to coincide again hopefully with the economy being able to open back up.
That's interesting. And Felicity, I too am really interested to see what they're going to do with this act now that we have a new administration in place. And so I get that question all the time from clients, because we primarily represent a lot of employers, but it is a heck of a financial burden on some small businesses, because our numbers are pretty low for who the act applies to. And so I just think everybody's, but I also think it has such great benefits for the reasons that you both just discussed. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out. So I appreciate those perspectives. Now, it's not lost on me that all 3 of us on this panel are women. And I think that we've all had interesting experiences, and all of us have had to shift some of our priorities as working women as a result of the pandemic. But I'm interested to know if you're seeing, or if you've had any experiences with or been talking to any women that are actually facing negative consequences in their workplace due to the pandemic. And if you have any ideas about how that could potentially be combated, for example, those of us that represent employers.
Great question. So one of the things that I like to do is actually look at the statistics of cases that are being filed. And interestingly, the harassment and discrimination cases when it comes to gender are down. And I can make sense of that in the sense that people are not in the workplace physically interacting with each other, talking to each other, face to face.
Harassing one another.
Correct. So that is something that does make sense to me. But we are still seeing cases filed. They're just a little different. So what I've been seeing and hearing about are, for example, comments or discrimination type things happening through what we're on, through video calls, through emails, things that are happening to individuals, comments that can still obviously be made that are inappropriate, but instead of face to face, they're over, emails or chat boards or, those types of things. So we're still seeing that, but the cases overall are down when it comes to those types of issues.
What just pops in my mind is you think of like internet bullies and all of the statistics that you show that people are actually, I think, more inclined to behave poorly over the internet than they would be face to face or in an office environment. And so that actually doesn't surprise me. And I'll be interested to see statistically if that continues to increase.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, people are less formal, more casual, think they can be funnier sometimes on email or, instant messaging instead of the formal, correspondence, or I am, with you in person. I'm going to be acting probably a little differently than I'm going to just say something offhand or flippantly on an email. And unfortunately, those things can really come back. I will say though that the cases that in the US that have increased, the type of cases are actually wage and hour cases, because people are working remotely and not every employer is understanding how they have to pay their employees on a remote basis. So that's a whole new area that is, it's always been very popular here in the US, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, but it's even increased dramatically during the pandemic.
That's a really good point and something I didn't think about. I mean, I don't know if it's been true for both of you. We've been home for some time now, and I've been working from home for some time now, but I actually feel like I'm working more because I have there's no separation between home and office. And so, I work almost at different times because my kids are around more and at different times. But it almost feels like the expectation is not to stop, right? We know you're home. We know you're not out and about and doing anything on the weekend. So why aren't you responding to my email? Why aren't you working on my case? And, most of us are probably exempt type employees, but I think for non-exempt employees, if that same mentality is there, I could see a significant increase in those wage and hour type claims. And just the tracking of it alone must be so complicated. Sara, are you seeing like anything like that over in the UK, or how is that being handled? Sort of this expectation for people, any employee, frankly, whether you're woman or man, to work differently and maybe perhaps harder.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd make some observations to what you have just said. Is that I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we were all working from home, and we all maybe enjoyed the fact that we no longer had an hour's commute each way to the office. Now we probably work through that hour that would have been a commute and more. And we've certainly seen as well that staff are have not been necessarily taking the holidays that they should have, because everybody's been hanging on hoping to be able to take a holiday, which actually means they can go on holiday. So people are not having the sort of the same rest breaks that they should have and that they need. And certainly in our firm, we've been working quite hard to remind people to take holiday, to take breaks. There's been a lot of communication around, please block out time in your diary at lunchtime and go for a walk, because there is this acceptance that the lines get incredibly blurred. And as you say, where else are you going to be? Almost, it's, why can you not answer my call? We know you're not allowed to do anything else. So there is that pushback. Now, in terms of translating that into claims and potential litigation and issues, I don't think we're maybe seeing that as yet. Our tribunals have remained busy, but they had a period where they were almost shut. They are now pretty running normally, but they've got massive backlogs. So the claims that would be coming through on this are probably not being heard as yet, or even maybe issued. Generally speaking, we see, I think on the last set of statistics, and our statistics lag quite a bit, but the last set of statistics, Equality Act claims, the whole raft of them, including sex discrim, accounted for almost a third of all claims. So there's a good chunk of claims there that relate to sex discrimination. In terms of working time, I don't think the stats show those quite so well. Generally speaking, if we get a claim which has a working time element to it, it's probably part of a bigger claim, an unfair dismissal or a failure to something associated with what we would call a protected act, almost a whistleblowing type claim. They don't tend to be standalone claims quite so much. But I think these blurring of the lines, I think I'd be surprised if we don't see some kind of additional litigation coming out of it at some point.
Yeah, and for me, just thinking about the impact of when, we all have to actually return to normal life and what that looks like for both ourselves and our staff and our employers and their staff and all of the issues that I think are coming that none of us have really focused on yet, because we've been so reacting to the past year that we're now starting to look forward about potentially what's coming. So, it's going to be really interesting times. So another major issue I wanted to make sure we addressed on this call was concerning what happened in 2020 with the Black Lives Movement matter. That movement became global in 2020 and really has brought, finally, inclusivity to the forefront, which I know the three of us on this call are very passionate about. And I'm curious, did that movement invoke or spark discussion in your firm more so than it had in the past? I know both of you well enough to know that the three of us talk about this a lot, the inclusivity, not just on a gender level, but really on a diverse level. Has that movement had any effect on what's being talked about either in your law firms or with your clients? And if so, what kind of effect has that had? Sara, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So it's been an issue that our firm's been sort of working hard on. I'm not sure whether are starting to try and improve how inclusive we are, coincided with the Black Lives Matter surge, or whether we were already on with it, but it certainly gave a real push. We have a network within the firm that was originally called the BAME network, and it's been renamed in the last 12 months to be called the REACH network, which is Race, Ethnicity and Cultural Heritage Network, and that's been relaunched to staff and is encouraging the levels of inclusivity. That network's got clear terms of reference, and it really aims to sort of bring in more allies to support what the network's trying to achieve and trying to disseminate best practice across the whole organisation. One of the projects that the network looked at was trying to educate everybody in the idea of white privilege and what that actually means. And the firm put together quite a powerful video of a number of our team talking about white privilege, and that's been something that's been promoted in the firm and externally, and just really trying to raise the profile and educate everybody across the firm in what this means. We celebrated Black History Month in October, and colleagues were encouraged to talk to each other about the issues. We've had a number of panels where colleagues were invited to sit on the panel and talk about issues that they'd had coming from perhaps minority backgrounds and the challenges that they had faced. And they were encouraged to be open discussions that the whole firm could listen and understand that some of the issues that are out there and the challenges that people have. So there's been a lot of work done there, and recognition that that there's still an awful lot to do.
Moving forward. How about you, Felicity? What have you seen?
Well, I first have to say that I saw the video that Sara's firm put out, and I really liked it a lot.
Yeah, it's really great.
Very powerful.
Thank you.
Very nice. And similar efforts at our firm, although we have not done the video, which I, again, highly applaud, but similar efforts at our firm to really look inward and see where we can make changes. One specific thing that we've started as a result of discussion more about these activities is we actually started a book club to discuss, obviously to read and then discuss the, some of the leading books regarding racism in the country, and, just different authors' points of view regarding the subject. And it is a book club for everyone, staff, attorneys, partners, and everybody has really participated in that. I've been really excited. At our last meeting, actually, my assistant, Kia McLean Harris, who is a published author of 5 books on poetry, and she's a very, very powerful African-American poet, speaker. She does a lot of public speaking. She actually gave an entire hour-long presentation on her poetry that was so powerful that it created such a, just a wonderful feeling amongst everyone that they've asked her to come back and do it again for the firm. So those types of things I think are really important, where we're getting together, we're discussing the ideas, discussing how it all makes us feel, hearing other people's viewpoints on the topic, and really just, listening to each other, talking about the issues, and becoming ourselves more educated.
That's great. That's great. I think our firm has done the same thing. I mean, we're a mid-sized firm in Colorado, and so we really strive to always keep diversity and inclusiveness at the forefront. I think every year we try to do training, but what we've realized is that some of those trainings, they sort of get monotonous, and we really need to step outside the box and really actually start talking to one another, similar to what you were just describing. And Sara, obviously what your firm is doing is incredible. And so instead of just getting in the habit of doing what we've always done, I think what 2020 did for us is, really push to the forefront that maybe what we've always done isn't working as well as what we wanted it to. And we really need to take a long, hard look at other ways to push this initiative such that we're making real change. And we're encouraging our clients to do the same thing, because studies show, as you guys know, it is good business. It's not only the moral and obvious thing to do, but it's good business practice to be more diverse, be more inclusive. And so, if anything, I think the Black Lives Matter movement this year couldn't have come at a more perfect time, given the fact that we were all under such constraint with the pandemic, that it was just a perfect storm of, okay, if ever is now. And that's certainly been my experience. And I'm really glad to hear that that's been both of your experience as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, because it's very easy for us to get, especially three women sitting on this panel, sometimes I get down the rabbit hole of, what are we doing to bring in more women and to make sure they have retention, right? To make sure they stay. That has been one of my big focuses in my career, in mentoring and working with our hiring director to make sure that we're offering opportunities to women and women that, want to have families or women that don't want to have families, but that they're given the same opportunities. Because I don't know if you guys were I've been practicing almost 20 years and I've had the proverbial pat on the head. Well, you have kids, so I'm not going to ask you to help me because I know you're too busy. And so we're really we've worked so hard, I think, in the past 20 years to get away from that behavior. But in the meantime, I think we've lost the bigger picture, which is, it's not just gender inequality anymore. It's really, diversity inequality that we need to start focusing on. And so I'm hopeful in this next decade, that's something that all of our firms and all of our employers will really be, putting some effort towards.
I think it's very easy, isn't it, to get quite easily siloed and get focus on one aspect of something and not see the bigger picture, as you say. I mean, what's quite interesting is that I read some statistics that said that obviously we've all been working from home, but from an exclusivity perspective, that's not great, because generally if you're going into the office and you're going into the workplace, everybody is in a diverse environment, or at least a more diverse environment than if you are just at home. Whereas if everybody's working from home, you're unlikely to really be mixing beyond your immediate obviously family at the moment, or family or immediate contacts and friends. And therefore, I know, coming a bit of a circle, I suppose, with the pandemic, but when people say, is having a central workplace a bit of a dead idea now? Should we all be working from home and being and remotely? To encourage diversity, actually, it's far better to have a workplace and have people thrown in together from all walks of life, having to get on with each other and being able to chat and work together as a team.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'll just speak from my experience. At the beginning of the pandemic, minus all of the, stress and anxiety that came with not knowing much, frankly, working from home was a heck of a benefit to me. I feel like I saw my family 50% more this year than I did last year. My commute was better. I'll just be honest, I love being in my pajamas maybe more than I should. And so those were great benefits at the beginning. But now that we're hopefully coming toward the end of this, Sara, what I think you just said rings really true for a lot of things, but the diversity piece of it being really, really important. Also, the mentoring of our younger associates, particularly our women, that is so much more challenging in this work from home environment. I mean, we brought on several new employees this year and clerks. We even brought on a lateral partner who has said to me she could walk down the street in downtown Denver, run into one of her partners, and she would never have any idea who they were. And that, that kind of, those kinds of statements have sort of built up over, I think, this past year, because if you would have asked me at the beginning of the pandemic, will you ever go back to work the way you were before? I would have said, heck no. Now, towards the end of it, I'm seeing the downside of not having the relationships, not having the mentorship ability. And I think, just from a labor and employment perspective, because that's what we're here to talk about, I think we're going to end up seeing a lot of problems if, we really do retreat into this work from home environment from a labor and employment perspective. And I think we all have to think about, what is the fallout from the work from home, or just the pandemic in general moving forward, and what would we tell people watching this presentation today to be thinking about? Felicity, what's been your experience?
Well, I'll take it from a positive standpoint in the sense that I think the pandemic has taught us that we can all be more flexible than we thought we could be. And that especially is an important issue for women in the work.
Yes.
And so the traditional come in every day, you have to be there by a certain hour, you have to, in our world,
FaceTime.
yes, space time is important, or we thought it was important, stay late, stay till, especially if you're an associate, the thought always was, well, you can't leave before your partner leaves and those types of things. Well, I think that has really just been ripped up and shredded with where, what we've experienced. And again, I think that's great. It's great for everyone, but it definitely impacts women more. And so in terms of, allowing people the flexibility to, maybe not work every day in the office, to maybe only work part of a day in the office, those types of things I think will really help, and it'll help all of us. And Kelley, you talked about retention, and retention is such a big, important part of gender issues. It's especially, we want to, we see that females drop out, especially out of the legal profession, at a higher rate than males, in part because they feel so constrained. They don't have the time to, take care of everything they need or want to take care of. And so I think this will hopefully help us raise those numbers when it comes to the retention of women in the legal profession. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Sara, what about you? What do you think will be the fallout from 2020? And maybe we should, Felicity, I love the idea of putting a positive spin on it. What is the fallout, but maybe what is the most positive thing that you've seen come from the 2020 pandemic? And what have we learned from a labor and employment perspective?
I mean, I could almost just say what she said.
Yeah.
I think Felicity has it. Everybody was forced to adapt in a way that you wouldn't normally have been able to force people to adapt. Everybody just had to get on with it, didn't they? And people have proved that they can do that. All the discussion around how much flexible working can an individual do? Well, I think quite clearly a lot more than has probably previously been accepted. So I think that is the positive thing to take out of it, that everybody is more adaptable. Working practices can be much more flexible, but I think it needs to be blended. I think we need not to go to the extreme that we're now in, and that some people, as you say, at the start of the pandemic, it felt like it was perhaps a bit of a nirvana, and it's not. And there are doubts that you've got to draw the best elements from it, and take those best elements, and we don't want to lose that, but it needs to be sort of built on sensibly, really.
Yeah, for the reasons we discussed, the making sure that the people that, at least for our firms, they're getting the mentorship, they're getting the camaraderie that goes along with having mutual trust and respect amongst your colleagues, particularly exactly. When you're in a diverse situation. I think it's just become more challenging.
Absolutely. No, I would agree.
One more quick question. Are you all providing resources to your employees in terms of, this is kind of almost a silly question, but I'm curious, are you providing resources to your employees to help them and assist them in working from home, or are you seeing that your employers are doing that? So for example, things like printers and computers and things that assist with the remote working? How are you giving support or assistance to facilitate this?
Shall I go? So we were quite fortunate the way our IT system set up. We, even when we're in the office, you essentially log in as if you were remote. So the system, fortunately, was ready to go. So when we all got an emergency text message on, I think it was March the 23rd or something like that, to say that's it, you're at home now. A very high percentage of the firm was online and working the next day. But to the extent people were not immediately in that boat, we've provided laptops. Staff who wouldn't normally have work mobile phones, a lot of them have been issued with mobile phones. People have had support around equipment generally that they've needed to get in. The bit which is still being worked really hard at is not so much the equipment element, but the people element, in terms of having to work much harder in relation to things like supervision and checking in on people's well-being and that type of element. So for instance, on supervision, people have been trying out pods, this idea that you open up a Zoom call, put it just beside you with a junior, and that junior works and you work, but they can hear your calls still. You can have a bit of a chat. You can tell them when you're going for a coffee. They can tell you, and almost just for 2 or 3 hours of the day, pretend that they're sitting next to you and can hear you in the same way as if you were next to each other in the office. Have to say, I thought it sounded like a totally bonkers idea when it was suggested. But a lot of people, and particularly the juniors, have liked it because they've got a little bit more of a norm of having immediate access to somebody more senior, and being able to hear what's going on, which might also include the dog barking and somebody knocking at the door with a parcel, but they can hear your work calls and encouraging a bit of camaraderie even though it's virtual.
I love that idea. I'm embarrassed that we haven't thought of it. I think it's a great idea, because we do go weeks. I mean, we try to do the happy hours, on Friday over Zoom, and we had the virtual holiday party, but those are getting a little bit, frankly, forced. We're just sick of them, frankly. I mean, we're ready to all just be back. But I love the idea of assisting that with mentorship and checking in on people's well-being. I think that's a really interesting idea and something I'll probably pass along. What about you, Felicity?
Well, likewise, Sarah, that is amazing. I love that idea. I think
it is a bit bonkers.
Yeah, it's wonderful though. It's wonderful. So Kelley, I'm sure that our firms are doing pretty much the same thing. I will say, thank goodness for Microsoft Teams. We, really had to get proficient in that right away, and we have all of our meetings, and we do the happy hours, we do the virtual holiday parties. We actually, for our women's initiative, that's been really fun. We do a business meeting and then a fun meeting, chat, get together, what's going on in everyone's lives. We do that twice a month. So we've really, I think the most important thing is really tried to stay connected, and not only with lawyer to lawyer, but also with our staff as well, and make sure that they're also included, feeling part of the firm. And I think communication is just been so doubly important with everything going on.
I agree with that. I agree. Well, the interesting part about this conversation is that I think if we met on January 28th, 2022, we would have some really interesting perspective about what the fallout has been from the pandemic. And hopefully we will all be sitting in our offices, able to have that conversation. That's certainly the plan, at least here in the United States and hopefully in the UK.
Absolutely.
But, I think we can probably close this out. Both of you have given such great insight on all of these issues that have been affecting in each of your respective jurisdictions. And I just think the conversation's been really interesting. Maybe in 1 year from today, we could all join back together and have this conversation again and look back at, how far we've come to 2022. So it's great seeing you both, and stay happy and healthy and keep passing along these fantastic ideas.
You too, Kelley.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
And that concludes our recording. Thank you for joining us today. You can find this and many other episodes at scgglobalspin.com.